Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Angela Graves, professor of poli-sci, political science. If you'd like to introduce yourself, go ahead.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Angela Graves. This is my ninth year at CUCA, and I teach such amazing classes as American government, constitutional law, Congress and the presidency, all kinds of stuff. I also teach a KC 201 class, adulting, which is a good time. I highly recommend that class. But yeah, I teach political science, and I'll tell a little bit more about my background later. But I currently live in Wellsville, New York, so I drive quite a ways to CUCA. But yeah, that's me.
So I don't know if this was one of the questions that I sent you, but was there ever a time where, even here at CUCA, where you were able to create your own role in a sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think one thing that's really great about CUCA is because it's small, there is a lot of room for creativity and for people, faculty and students and staff to sort of figure out what they can do to contribute. And that's pretty embraced here. So that's been a really nice thing. But yeah, very early on, when I came to CUCA, there were probably only 4 or 5 political science and history majors. We have a joint program. And for the most part, most of our majors were just future social studies teachers. So there wasn't so much of a program in terms of liberal arts content. So I really took it upon myself to build the program. And let's see, we just graduated, I think like 12 students. We have on average 25 to 35 in our program. So that's been a real, pride for me. And I think that a lot of it has to do with, I mean, obviously there's some institutional level things. And when you build a program, hopefully it's sustainable. But I also really embrace like a mentor model. And so I do feel that I've been able to really use that to create a program that sort of lives up to some of my ideas about citizenship and community and whatnot. So that's been really nice.
Yeah, do you think you kind of try to instill some values on students, such as
Yeah, I
community?
I don't know what kind of values I would say. I mean, definitely, Dr. Koberstein talks about creating your own brand. And I mean, I talk about that in my classes. One book I assign talks about it like being an artisan when you work, which if you think about if you go to a fancy bakery, there's like a stamp on the bread, or like you
Mhm.
get a cappuccino that costs $12 instead of just Dunkin', but it has like a fancy swirl at the top.
Yeah.
So I always do tell my students, I was like, whatever you might think about me, or like maybe we don't share the same opinions, but you certainly can't argue that anyone does it like me. So I have very much my own style. And I think that's the value that I convey, of just being really being confident in who you are. And there really are, I mean, there are objectives in political science, at least in my opinion, and I'm starting to feel a little bit more forceful about them in recent
Mhm.
years, but it's really not my business what your personal opinions are. So I at least want you to have conviction and character and be able to stand up and articulate what you believe in. So I think that's pretty much our way of doing things.
Yeah, and at CUCA we talk about finding your edge,
Hmm.
which is basically what we were just talking about. Uh, do you do you feel like you have a specialty within a specialty almost to have an edge?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, in as far as my classes go and my way of thinking about politics in the world, I definitely have an edge. Part of it comes from my background. So I studied post-communism and I lived in Eastern Europe for 6 years. But when I returned to the US, I ended up doing my PhD on American politics. And there's a story behind that that I
Hmm.
actually might want to share
Yeah.
here at some point because it relates to our topic. Um, but I think bringing the world back into American politics is really important. I would argue that it's more important for people who have experience with other kind of political systems to teach about the US, just because you can be more theoretical and more critical. And you can understand, I feel like I understand or appreciate my country better having lived outside of it.
Yeah.
I mean, it also means I hold it to higher standards, and I certainly don't think there's anything unpatriotic or wrong with that. So that's one thing. The other edge would be theory. So I really, really try to avoid talking about political issues in my class. And that sounds weird, right? Like we talk about them, we talk about plenty,
Yeah.
but it's the moment we talk about an issue, we all have an emotional reaction to that, and then we'll sort of dig in. So instead, when I like play mind games, as I sometimes, I mean, I do play mind games in my classes, but present like theoretical puzzles and like sort of take the personal context out of them,
Mm-hmm.
that seems to really force people to work harder, to think, and to like struggle through issues. And that's very satisfying. Like that gets really good discussions.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
I just had a conversation with Dr. McKenzie, and he had invoked some ethical dilemmas into the conversation, and that's always productive because you find out. I think it helps you crystallize what you actually believe in, and ways you can work through theoretical knowledge and kind of apply that.
Right. And like at the very least, you have to really be able to defend those emotional positions you have. So one example, like if we're just going down a rabbit hole, I've thought about this in the fall. One of my like biggest questions I ask across all my classes, I ask it. I don't answer it. I don't provide answers. I just get people to ask questions, right? Better questions. This question is like, who is government for? Like, is it for those of us that care and are fairly well educated and well informed? And, you know, pretty much like you can trust me to govern myself, right? Like you can trust me to eat as many vegetables for the most part as I need to eat, to do a good job parenting my children, to pay my bills on time, to be a responsible member of the community. And I think, you know, to be fair, most students that end up in my classroom are the same way, right? There's a reason you're going to college. Your family's worked hard, you've worked hard. But a lot of us think about government or contemplate issues, and we think about people who maybe need to be governed more than us. And I've called them sort of controversial. Like in some literature, they're called the village idiots, or like I've called them the bums. It's like whatever you think that means, right? Like I'm sure we all have amendment. Like in your community, just think about the town you're in right now. Like who are like the bums, or like the people who don't hold their end of the bargain.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, when we're designing government, you would design it very differently for those two groups. And so I think that's missing from most of the conversations we're having. I mean, just look at the face mask thing, whatever you think of that personally, or what you think, like I know there's all kinds of personal factors that play into that decision. But if we go in the fall and I say, okay, you guys have to make up rules to govern a pandemic in this imaginary community, and that imaginary community is made up mostly of people like you, or that imaginary community is made up of people that really cannot be trusted to make the right decision for themselves, like that's going to look completely differently. And then just think of every single thing we debate about: guns, abortion, right? Like all these different things. It changes depending on the audience, and I think that's a mistake that people make, right? Is they want to think about government like, oh, well, it should be this way because I'm so wonderful, but it should also be this way because those people are so crappy. And that's like, yeah.
It's interesting that you talked about how you studied post-communism in a different country, because we, in the conversation with Dr. McKenzie, we had talked about the state and the opposer of the state, which is something that you really need to take into context, because there must be an opposing to the state in order to keep it in check, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's always important to go through a decision or ethical dilemma and kind of think of both sides. All right, let's play devil's advocate, which I thought was cool in some ethics class that I had with Dr. Augustine, was that you could just play devil's advocate and you could pin out the meaningful points that we can create common ground for, and work from there.
Yeah, and that's like bringing up communism, for example. I mean, I didn't live under communism. I got to Romania 7 years after communism had fallen, but I mean, you can still feel it today. And I think that's a really, I find that's something that we need to spend more time educating ourselves on. I think that first and foremost, words are thrown around a lot with not understanding what they mean. But just also what that, like, yeah, what that actually meant, what living under communism meant. I mean, it's unfathomable for most of us.
It's kind of one-minded.
Right. And the thing that I find interesting in the context of the pandemic today, like not to be too controversial, but under communism, you had no individual rights, right? Like the state's longevity or survival is put above whatever private interests you have for yourselves. So on the one hand, that can be good, right? Because then you can force people to do something
that is
right.
beneficial.
Right, that's beneficial. Yeah. Like if the communist government says everybody quarantine or everyone do this, everyone's going to, because otherwise you're going to be punished and thrown in jail. But then the counter to communism is not just putting your individual self-interest first. Like, I think that's something we get mistaken about, of like, oh, I don't want to be socialist, or I don't want to be communist. It's like, okay, but it also doesn't mean blatant disregard for collective interest. Like the whole idea behind democracy is that we can choose to be better. We can choose to advance a better version of ourselves, right? And we can balance individual self-interest with collective interest. I mean, it's just like, again, to think of analogies, right? Another one I use a lot is parenting. Like if I just parent completely self-interested, like tell my kids, like, don't violate my liberty, like mommy wants to have a nap for 16 hours a day, or mommy wants to hit the gym beam, like that's my own. But it's like we all imagine that we're going to be great parents, and we understand that like sacrificing our own self-interest is like a major part of that, right?
Yeah, it's a straight negotiation.
Right. So it's just funny that some of us don't apply those same values to our citizenship. Like that's something different. Like now all of a sudden I'm not supposed to care about the people who live in my community. Right. Or, at least be open to like, oh, okay, well, if that bothers you, maybe let me not do it, or think about not doing it, or maybe change my behavior in a way that I don't have to violate your sense of safety or morality or whatnot. So yeah, people, to me, it's just amazing. And this is what education is for, right? Like it is a privilege. Education is absolutely a privilege. I am super privileged to be a college professor, and I get to teach and to experiment with ideas. Like I honestly cannot think of a better job in the world. Right. And like my husband, for example, who has a 9-to-5 job, like he teases me incessantly. But at the end of the day, right, like it is a privilege, and I get to spend time thinking about like that's my job, is to take the time to think about something, and to get you to think about it differently too.
I mean, when you ask how privileged are you, well, what scope are you looking? Are you looking around towards my friend group? Because if I'm privileged, I'm pretty equal with them. But are we talking about the country, or are we talking about the actual world? Because we're like the 0.1% really in the world. So we're extremely privileged.
Right.
Even just enrolling into a college is extremely privileged.
Right.
Because you're above average. You're like in the top 30%. So that was something that I touched on with a couple other professors, was just the scope of what's the context that you're actually talking about in the situation.
Right. You have to frame your audience or your group of comparison. And that's like obviously very dangerous, to forget about your relative privilege to other people, because humility is one of the most important values. I really think humility is very important. And that's another thing about world experience. Not everyone has the ability to travel around and see different things. Like I'm privileged in that regard, that I've been able to live in different places of the world and see things, but then you can also see a bigger scope of like what it means to be poor, for example,
Now, how did you start your traveling to Romania? Was it like on a whim? Was it?
Yeah, so I'm weird. I have a lot of these weird stories, but I grew up in DC, and I'm completely American. In fact, I've been doing Ancestry over the quarantine.
Yeah.
So I can tell you what year. No, but I grew up in DC to just like a typical family. But my parents worked for the Library of Congress.
Mhm.
So they were map librarians. So I grew up with maps around my house, and we used to, I actually didn't really travel. I never traveled internationally as a kid, but we would have people come from different countries and stay with us. And when I was 12, I read Dracula.
Uh-huh.
And I was in a very obsessive stage of my life. So once I read Dracula and there was a place called Transylvania, I looked it up in my encyclopedia and I saw it belongs to a country called Romania. And I read, this would have been 1992, so communism had just fallen. And I read about their dictator. So Romania had one of the worst communist dictators. I mean, he was absolutely like North Korea, like megalomaniac level. Whereas, the other communist countries were bad, but not necessarily as brutal. So I was very fascinated by that. And of course, I was inclined to political science because I grew up in DC and my parents were very politically active. So long story short, I was obsessed. And I've got pen pals. This was like sort of at the dawn of the internet. I found pen pals. I basically made contact with any Romanian person I could. And I was all ready to go to Indiana University to study Romanian studies. It's like the one school in America that had it. But then at the last minute, a colleague of my dad's happened to be the Minister of Education of Romania and heard about me and invited me and was like, we have a program where you can learn Romanian, so she can come. And I had just turned 17 because I had skipped a grade. And so I was just like, okay. My dad's like, do you want to go to Romania? And I was like, okay. And you could, I mean, it was really hard to travel there at that time. I mean, you couldn't even find a video about what Romania looked like. I remember like just wanting to watch a video, like you couldn't do any of what you could do today.
Yeah.
So my mom and I went to check it out. And luckily I had I had some people, some connections already. I was like, okay, I'll go. So I moved there in August and I started this program for foreigners to learn Romanian. And this was like leftover from communism. So the first day I went to school, I didn't speak a word of Romanian. So I sound like all badass and brave right now, but I wasn't. Basically, my parents were weird and were like, okay, we'll send you to go to Romania. And my dad drops me off. I have a 3-bedroom apartment fully furnished for like $300 a month. And here I am like all by myself. But this program, like the professors didn't speak to you in English. They yelled at you in Romanian from day one. And the other students were like 30-year-old men from like Libya, Iraq, Tunisia. They were all there to be doctors because there was like some weird thing where like people from the Middle East would go to Romania to become a doctor. So here I am, like this American girl, and that like I have to like it was so hard for me to learn Romanian, but I did finally. I finally, like after a year, I could speak it fluently. And then I was the first American. I decided to stay. Of course, I was in love. Like there was no way I was ever leaving after that. So, and I mean, I learned so many things. Like I had to wash my clothes in the bathtub and hang them up, like I didn't have a vacuum cleaner. You had to like beat your rugs. I learned how to cook. And so I just stayed and I studied political science, like as a Romanian student, which was hard, but it was interesting. And then finally, I did my master's degree in Budapest, in Hungary, and I had a lot of Hungarian friends too. So I was there for 6 years, and then I came back to the U.S. and went to Syracuse to do my PhD.
Yeah. And what was your PhD? What was your dissertation?
So the interesting thing, this was actually a story I wanted to tell about this particular unit. We always like those of us that are very driven. I think there's like people who are very driven. I find students like they come in, they know exactly what they want. Like, I want to go to law school. I want to do this. I want to do that. Or then there's the opposite of like people like, I don't know what I want to do. And it's especially hard if you're not in a professional program, right? Because like you're going to get the thing from your parents, like, well, what are you going to do with a political science degree or whatever?
What are you going to do with a psych degree? Therapy?
Right. And there's these like preconceptions. So it's interesting because of course I was very motivated and I thought for sure that I was going to study post-communism, right? Like I'm unique. Like I'm an American that speaks this language. I've lived there. I worked at the embassy there. And I get to Syracuse and the professor that I was supposed to work with, that's a field called comparative politics. Like when you look at different political systems and you look at development. So I was like, of course, I'm going to be a comparativist. And the professor didn't like me, and he didn't really understand why I went to Romania. He was like, you could have just gone to like Harvard and studied with so and so and whatever. So he had very set ideas
Yeah.
about like what education meant. And I'll never forget, like, my first graduate school assignment for him, like, he basically gave me the grad school equivalent of like a D. He hated what I wrote, and it was really frustrating. And so I really struggled. And at the same time, I guess I got an assignment to be a teaching assistant for the guy who taught American government.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was really interested in teaching, so they thought that would be a good fit. So I really enjoyed that. Like, he was like epic. He was like one of the best professors at Syracuse. And then I took a seminar with a professor about American, like graduate American politics. And any assignment that I did, I would like bring in my experience, like comparing the US, like basically using comparative politics to study the US. And my professors loved it. Like, those professors really embraced me. They were very encouraging. You know, this is another thing, like I tell my students, like, I always have this struggle where I feel I'm not being strict enough, or then I get a little bit salty. I'm like, well, no one's taking me seriously. Or like, people be like, oh, I studied so hard for like Professor so-and-so's test. And I'm like, why didn't you study hard for my test? And they're like, Ange, so I have this whole thing where like, I like being open and flexible and caring and nice, but then I worry sometimes I'm not rigorous enough. But it goes back to my experience in grad school. I do well on positive reinforcement. If you praise me and identify what I'm doing right, I'll do even better for you. But if you're like, you suck, this is terrible, like, I'm like, okay, never mind. I'm just gonna like
shield off and then you say you never liked that professor and don't want to take their classes. Yeah.
Right. And it's just, so for me, it's like, it's compatibility, right? Like, learning how to motivate people, you have to like find a compatible way to interact. So the moral of the story is that I thought I was going to be a comparativist, but because I had the right mentorship and I had these particular people embrace me, I became an Americanist. And that's my dissertation. I looked at international influences on American law and the Supreme Court. So how fitting is that, right? I went abroad, I come back, and that's what I study. So yeah, I mean, I've been very fortunate, but that's a lesson I always tell my student. Like, if you had asked me when I was your age, like, I would have had a very clear cut set like of plans. I would have never, okay, you're going to be teaching state and local government or American government and being obsessed with like upstate New York politics.
Mm-hmm.
But when you like develop skills and you are flexible and you adapt, then that's resilience, right? Like, you're going to excel at whatever sort of path you find.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's really important for people to keep in mind.
Yeah, that was talking about compatibility. That was basically what I did with nursing, and I'm sure they'll hear in other videos, but what I did was I basically had the set goal of going to nursing school, getting my RN, and then immediately applying to med school and doing surgery. I was dead set on it. I've done
Right.
I've shadowed over 1,000 hours, and about 400 of those are in the OR. So
Okay.
like I knew 100% from field period to high school that I was going to be in the OR. That was my niche.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, my freshman year, I took a course with Koberstein, Intro to Human Development, and I was like, man, like, this professor is going to be like the connection, like my way out. I joke with him, but like, I only at the time wanted to be his friend so that he could write me a good recommendation.
Right.
You know? So, but once I got to know him more and I took on a minor in psychology, that was when my path kind of changed.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, well, this is addicting. Okay, I'm not that interested in nursing anymore. I mean, I would be up the night before a nursing test watching YouTube videos on psychology. And then I started picking it up more and more. And so I started to take advantage of that. And now here we are creating a summer course for the incoming students. So it was interesting to see that I still wanted to make an impact on people. That was my goal in mind. But this was a far better compatible route, and a route that's much more meaningful for me.
Right. And that's so important, right? Because if you think about it, it's not it's not just that Koberstein's like a cool professor.
Yeah.
Or like my mentors that I like fell into. Like other people took their class and they had a great experience, but it's something about like worldview and mindset and attitude and personality. And it's modeling to you that you would be good at maybe similar skill sets, right?
Mhm.
So it's not just about liking someone or like doing well in that subject matter. It's okay, this is how this person manages a classroom, right? That, I mean, that's the experience you can get as an undergrad. You can see how people manage classrooms. You can also see people on campus, right? Staff like work with programming or things, but you're seeing people do their jobs, and that is going to indicate to you like if that's a person you want to learn from more just than beyond a class, right? And so very similarly, right, like that will happen with me is that I get students in our major that it's just we just think the same way, right? Like we like solve puzzles the same way, and that really ends up being a great relationship because we can both like we can all grow together, right?
Yeah. I mean, there'd be times when I'm with Koberstein and we'll go with agreeing with something, and then I had a winter field period with him, creating research on self-efficacy and a couple other measures for the incoming students, and I would be at one point where I'd be arguing with him like that doesn't make sense. Like why would someone ever do that? So it's always good to be able to debate with a professor and see their insight to their actual theoretical knowledge that because they probably know more than you, but it never hurts to discuss and give them a different lens and open their eyes.
Absolutely.
So that's really cool.
Yeah. And that's why this is such a great job is we get to have students like you, and it's so rewarding, and you challenge us as well. It's funny when I used to teach like the KC 101 equivalent class, and even sometimes now in other forums, I always tell students at CUCA, if when you're in a major, right, especially early on, although it might take a year or two to figure out, if you don't like a majority of your classes and you don't like a majority of your professors, then you're in the wrong major, because again, it's not the outcome, it's the process, right? It's not the destination, it's the journey, if we want to be shade. But again, it's like when I like me changing paths in grad school, just like you changing paths, at no moment was it like, oh my God, I'm not going to end up doing what I wanted. It was like, here's this whole new world of things opening up because I'm on the right path, right? Instead of obstacles, I'm seeing more and more opportunities. And so that is so important for students to know that and it's not going to be for everyone. It's not going to be Koberstein. It's not going to be me. I tell people, I'm like, there are those of you out there that absolutely like I drive you insane the way I teach my classes or manage, like actually I always tell people like as a student, I'm not sure if I would have liked me because I am so A-type. Like believe it or not, I'm like the crazy professor now that's like off on tangents, and although I'm still structured, I'm still organized. Here I am like defending, like trying not to like I'm super structured, I'm super responsive and things like that, but I am a little out there, right? So like I probably wouldn't have liked that because I'm the person with like the notes like in the front row, like, hey, like don't fast forward that slide, or like, so like I tell people at CUCA, you need to find that person, whoever it is. Like it could be totally the opposite of me, but you need to find someone. And you need to make sure you're in the right major, and you need to not worry about the job that's at the end, because, and this is so like cliched by now, but like we don't even know what jobs are going to be available in 4 years. Do we have any clue what sectors are going to be hiring in 4 years, especially not now after the pandemic, right? Like, maybe nurses, like, but even that, like the medical profession has contracted. So it's crazy. Like all of this stuff is crazy. If you are going to be in college 4 years, then do something that you're passionate about, and that will make you into a better person who's better equipped to, and Koberstein knows this phrase, this one is very dear to me, is dealing with ambiguity. Like to me, success is how well can you cope with not having any clue what's going to happen next. And I don't like, that's not a black or white. Like, I don't cope well with not knowing, like I freak out about like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Like, what's going to
Mm-hmm.
happen next year? But I'm at least somewhat like in the back of my mind, like, okay, but you'll figure it out. Cause I figure it
You'll
out.
see it when you get there.
Yeah, and I think what that confidence is. Like deep down inside, even if of course it's normal to be fearful and
Mm-hmm.
to like self-deprecate or self-doubt, but like and the thing is the reason you're doing it is because you're aware that uncertainty exists. I mean, if you
Mm-hmm.
think about it, the people who are like, I don't give a whatever, like they have no idea that uncertainty is coming, and they're like, they'll get by, but they're not going to cope the same way. They're not going to adapt. They're just going to sort of keep drifting, because they're not even thinking. They're not even aware that things have changed, right? Because they're not paying attention.
What's one way a student can get your attention in and outside the classroom? I know you're infamous for having, and so is Koberstein, for allowing people to come in during office hours and chill and hang out and conversate. So what do you think one way is that a student can reach out to you?
And of course, I don't know if we're going to be able to do that in the fall.
Yeah.
I recently renovated my office so that I think 12 people could sit in it at one time, and they were frequently, but obviously social distancing.
Yeah.
No, that's a really good question. I mean, just like showing that you actually care and you have a pulse. And I don't want to say this and sound self-deprecating. I mean, first of all, a lot of us have resting bitch face. So I'm trying to be open-minded. Like I've had students be like, I used to get really, I'm like, what?
Well, now you won't be able to see it with the mask on, so
Yeah,
like,
that's
it's all good.
true. That's true.
It's all good.
Like I know, like I'm not asking people to be like out of their comfort zone if you're not open or you're not like a particularly outgoing person. But I mean, really, you can tell people who literally like they just like look miserable being there. And so like just being engaged, like asking a question or laughing or having fun. I think the biggest one I see nowadays is that people seem really self-conscious. And I think that's like, I don't know what that is, if I'm just going to sound like an old person. Maybe we always were like that. But I do think with like subsequent generations, maybe it's getting, and I mean, now we've all been isolated for like how many months, right? So what I think, what usually distinguishes me between students is like, I make a fool of myself. Like I have no fear. I am shameless. I will not be embarrassed. Like outside of the classroom is a different thing, but inside the classroom, I'm fearless. Like it's my comfort. It's my like safe space. So but only as long as like at least a few students join in. And by join in, I mean like enjoy the fact that they get to see someone act like me, right? Like they get to experience, they don't have to do it themselves, but like you at least appreciate what I'm doing. You appreciate the fact that like I literally am not like I am not embarrassing. I can't be embarrassing myself because I can't get embarrassed. Do you know what I mean? And like just talking about things that are like really shocking or like putting ideas out there that are completely crazy or just, and so if you're like willing to participate in that, it shows. If you're resistant to that, then that's not a problem, right? That just might not be your style. But I would think that if you have an appreciation for learning, I find that like the vast majority of students, like they respect it.
Yeah.
Because that's what it is at the end of the day. I'm having fun because I enjoy learning. I enjoy being curious about the world. And if that's not you, then you're like, okay, you can get through college and maybe you have different pursuits, but like, I'm not going to speak to someone like you. But if you appreciate it, then participate.
That's one of the main reasons why this is called Survive or Thrive, because realistically, you can get through college. You're born in the U.S. If you applied, and you're most likely going to be successful, most likely. So you could get through it and earn your degree. That's not the point of college. The point is to elevate yourself.
Right.
Is to create a new you within 4 years.
Yep.
A new trajectory.
Right.
Because once you get to college and you walk through those doors freshman year, you're a clean slate. And it's about the individual.
You know, it's funny because doesn't Koberstein talk about this a little? Like his first attempt at college wasn't
Yeah,
necessarily.
he's a dropout.
Yeah, yeah.
He
And
dropped
I
out.
want this is something I tell people in my classes. So I moved to Romania when I was 17. And
Mhm.
I had that apartment that cost my parents $300 a month. I had parties. We ordered pizza every night the first semester until I
Mhm.
learned, my roommate and I learned how. I had a roommate who was Romanian, so she helped me. But
Mhm.
like she was in law school, she was busy. We literally ordered pizza every night for like 3 months straight. The pizza cost $1 to be
Wow.
delivered, right? And so I got through college. I learned to speak Romanian fluently. I completed my degree. I had pretty good grades. But in Romania, you didn't have to go to class. Your only grade was the final exam. So, like John, my Romanian education is that I know how to cook food. I know how to take care of a house, of an apartment. I know how to wash my clothes in a bathtub.
Mhm.
I mean, the experiences that I have in Romania, right? Like they elevated me as a person, right? They gave me real world experiences. I got to go outside of my door every single day and just observe a different culture, a different time period. It's like being back in time 50 years. The
Yeah.
people that I talked to, like I would just talk to people. So when I talk about college and I like sort of get on people's, like get on their cases, I'm like, okay, well, let me just be honest. Like, college was so easy for me, right? It wasn't the actual education. Like, as long as I generally paid attention to what was going on, but that wasn't the model at the time, right?
Yeah.
Pretty much all of my friends, they had jobs, they were living at home, or they were living in their own apartment. Like, college was there to get a degree in a subject matter to direct you. And so, unfortunately, we don't give the same kind of life experience to people in the US. And it is a shame. Like, I
Yeah.
wish that everyone had their own apartment as soon as they moved out from home and got to like manage their own affairs and not have to live in a dorm with curfew or rules or whatever. But it is what it is. And so you guys have to figure out what you can do at a place like Cuca College to, like you said, elevate yourself. And it might not be like get like straight A's, but be mature, like be an adult, learn what that means to be an adult, learn what it means to take responsibility. And for people like Koberstein and I, it's taking advantage of resources. It's being real, it's being honest. It's not pretending to be someone you're not, right? So like,
Koberstein's trademark is being unapologetically him.
yeah, exactly. And that's why he and I think are very similar, right? In that respect, is like that's one thing that I'm me and I'm comfortable with it. And that's one lesson I can at least teach, right? Even if the other stuff doesn't speak to you.
Mhm.
And like, I'm very self-deprecating. I mean, I am like this adulting class I teach, like that's born out of like me failing at adulting, right? Like I'm divorced, I'm broke, all these different, I have debt. And so like I developed this class and oh my God, I'm so much more informed about it. But like I laugh at myself. And part of that is like, I also think that's a tool that some maybe certain people or even women might use to like make sure they're not too intimidating. Because if I was like, oh, I speak Romanian and I'm so cool, right? But no, these are my experiences.
Yeah.
I'm not, like I am ashamed of them, but I'm also like, whatever.
Yeah.
At least I learned from my mistakes. And so we're human beings. And that's the whole thing here with a college, like a liberal arts college, like Cuca, is that's what you're getting. Like you're not off in some foreign, like, sexy city living on your own, like going to bars and like, every night or like, going to art openings, but you're getting to be closer to see people more as human beings than you would otherwise. Like my professors in Romanian, I didn't know anything about them, right? So that was a different experience. So I at least try to bring to my students a little bit of like the real world. Like I treat them like adults. I consider them as adults, right? And
Yeah, I mean
it's
you
important.
are. You're
Yeah.
you're living on your own
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
Uh,
And that's why I try to empower in a classroom is like, take responsibility, like own this. This is yours.
yeah, touching on a little bit of responsibility, we talk about the investment that you're making.
Mm-hmm.
You're throwing away money that you don't have in the hopes for a better future
Right.
and hopes to return on your investment.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just the dollar value, but it's also your time and your life that you're putting at risk for the
Mm-hmm.
next 4 years. Because if you if you don't have a positive trajectory, then you did just waste 4 years.
Right.
And it's not to waste 4 years as finding a career job is the goal. It's to elevate yourself and to thrive, basically.
Right. And going back to something you asked for specific advice to this incoming class, like what would you do to stand out? So my big thing is like, once you start to identify people that resonate with you, or like, wow, that person's really cool, whether it's your RA or whether it's someone else on campus or a professor, like notice how they do things, right? So like I definitely have learned a lot from my PhD advisor. Like he's just like the coolest person in the world. And he's so polite. He's so considerate. He answers your email immediately. He follows through on things, right? He's the right combination of professional, but also just like so self-deprecating. Like I really try to be like him. Like a few years ago, it struck me. It's like every single day I wake up trying to be like Keith. And it's like the students that at least pay some of that back, like, answering an email. Okay, thanks, got it. Like every semester I have those 1 or 2 students at the beginning. I send out weekly emails and they write back, thanks, Dr. Graves. Have a great weekend. Like that's what I'm talking about. Like I immediately remember you then, right? Or just to give you an example, after we went remote this semester, like I had a handful of students, like they're on a list, and these students would be there every morning. I had Facebook pages. They would comment on everything I posted. And I don't even think that I would, it was their favorite class or something. I think they liked me and they wanted me to know I appreciated it. And that's so mature. That's not just like, oh, you're being so nice to Angela. It's like, that's maturity when you like look around you and you see who would really work their butt off for you, or who would make sacrifices for you. And you honor that and you value that. That's like an adult calculation of like, who should I waste time on and who should I not, just to put it like very savagely.
Like a little personal story is when I first met Dr. Koberstein in Intro to Human Development. And once I first recognized like, okay, this guy could take me somewhere, I sent him an email about a TED Talk that was like similar to what we talked about in class. And there was no response. At first, I'm like, all right, cool. That's all good. Maybe you didn't see it, whatever. And then I sent him another one the next week, and he was like, oh wow, like this is cool, yada yada. And then I sent him another one, and he's like, hey, why don't we get a cup of coffee and like let's talk about this. So like that's just you're just cracking open the door. Just a simple reply of thank you, I got it, or here's this.
Right.
Just that little small contact is like, oh wow, okay, the professor knows me by name now. Yeah. And it's really easy to do that at CUCA.
Oh yeah.
That's what's great about the small liberal colleges. You could really take advantage of networking with people. I mean, if you just get with a name basis on them, and then you get to know them more and more. Koberstein's stuck his neck out for me tons of times, and it's only because I've been able to do it for him as well. Like I received last year the Trevor Irby Award for leadership, and that was because he wrote this like amazing recommendation that like made me look way better on paper, but no, it was all true. But it's amazing to see what that started with just an email with no reply, and a TED Talk did. People could call that kissing ass, and sure, go ahead, call it what you want. That is the smartest thing you can do, is to reach out to a professor. I respect
and want to like me. I mean, another pair, like I always give the example of family, like how do I like treating your, and then also relationships, right? Like, I'm sorry, like, isn't that when you're like dating someone or trying to impress, like, aren't you essentially kissing their ass, which means that you recognize that they can be important for you. And that's not just strategic, right? Like, but I also encourage, I think sometimes CUCA students, I mean, I've taught at other institutions where it's just like over strategic, right? Where it's all about networking, it's all about kissing ass or whatever. And we're not at a place like that, and you're not going to see that. And that's actually really refreshing. Sometimes I think, though, the students we have forget, like, dude, like I am gonna, like I'm the one that's gonna recommend you. Like even students that aren't my majors, like a lot of social work students, and I end up really getting along. Like I have given so many recommendations for social work.
I'm not a child and family studies, but I'm friends with Koberstein.
Right, right.
I've only taken well, now 2 of his classes, but it was really only one of his classes.
Yeah. And so that's why, like, you really, sometimes I think like people don't, I mean, like, so to give you my example of like my PhD advisor, like I graduated in 2011. He wrote a letter of recommendation for me this summer. Like I still need letters of recommendation. You need them from someone outside that you don't work with. And he's still like, I'll email him and within an hour, okay, yep, no problem. I'll say, and he just has the same letter. He just upstate. He doesn't have to rewrite it. You know what I mean? But, and I don't like, again, I don't want to like over like flex on like professors, but so first of all, if you're going to grad school, then absolutely those letters matter so much. And like I can say I have a really good relationship with Syracuse Law School. Every single student that I've written a letter of recommendation for, like I know the director of admissions personally. This former advisor of mine, Keith, he's the vice dean. Every single person I recommend has gotten in the past 8 years. So I don't necessarily think that's a coincidence. Like I've told people there's been 1 or 2 people that I wouldn't write a letter for because I'm not like, you shouldn't be going, like you're not qualified. Do you know what I mean? So I've had to tell, it's very rare, but I have had to tell people no, because it's your name, like it's your professional recommendation on the line. So it has to be honest. But yeah, that's one of the biggest pleasures that we have. Like people like Koberstein, it's not just like having you in our class and having a fan club. It's that we genuinely want to help people just like we've been helped in our career. That's key. Yeah. Koberstein had a very similar experience to me. He had a lot of support. He had to struggle. He went through a lot in grad school. And so we model that. And so we want to like pay it back. And so students need, or just even the opportunities on campus, like you said, scholarships or, yeah, like we had a student, I have a student that I didn't put him for the Trevor Irby Award this year because he's only a rising junior, but next year that's going to be me writing that letter for him. Do you know what I mean? Like that's, we think about those things. So yeah, I mean, there's going to be professors on campus that are good professors, and if you send an email they might write back, but then you really can seek out the ones that might really want to take you on and help you become better.
I mean, you may not know, but in the last module that you'll be in, we do have them contact a professor.
Yeah,
we do have them ask questions, so that's really good. I mean, so that they're even cracking open the door before they get there. So they say, "Oh, your name's Joe. Oh, I remember you. You sent me that email. All right, thanks. Cool." You know, Dr. Koberstein's phrase of tension creates growth.
Yes.
Yes. And so when you were about to diverge between the comparative and what you are now, what do you think in whether it was you or someone else who pushed you past that kind of brink of failure, saying, "Screw it, I'm just gonna, leave and not continue"?
That's a really good question. And I think there's been other moments in like my personal life in recent years. Well, I think it's really important to have a support network. Like my parents have always been like I have the type of parents where I call them and tell them everything, like any problem. And they'll be calm and they'll like support me, but they're not overbearing. They just sort of they just sort of observe while I work out things in my own head. So I think that's important. And I realize not everyone has that, but that's why that's very, like, especially if you're a person that doesn't have that in your personal life, well, then when you come to QCA, if you can find it, absolutely. And I do have students like that where they don't have that at home, right? Like I'm the person they're like sending a message to about like, hey, this is going on. And it's like, that's the best model, right? Of like parenting or mentoring is like, you let the person figure it out on their own. Like you don't give too much advice. Because if you give too much advice and then someone goes a different way, that becomes awkward and that person might feel insecure. So I think it's just the fact that, like I had parents that were willing to support me taking risks and not really judge me for, just like, okay, well, I'm sure you can, and just letting me figure it out on my own. And that's really hard because, like, as a parent, that's now really hard to do with my kids because it's like, oh crap, I don't want that. Like, I want them to have a lot of room too.
Yeah.
But I want to be close to them, right? And I want to, so anyway, I don't have to worry about that quite yet. But that's really important, is having whatever it is in your life that's going to give you the confidence to and to work it out. And it's really important not to give up. Instead of giving up, I constantly find new angles. So I never have given up something until I have something else under my belt. And I am so entrepreneurial. I'm always trying to find new things. And it's mostly like because I'm obsessive compulsive-y and I just need to be interested. So I'm constantly searching for things to like keep me occupied and keep me like motivated. And by doing that,
I feel the same way. Just before I was on the call with you, I just created a website for face masks with the Yeezy 2020.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
So I'm gonna do a little, gonna make a little side money doing that.
I'm gonna use this video as an opportunity to not endorse Kanye. My mom texted me this morning. She's like, "Are you gonna vote for Kanye?" And I was like, I think he's as crazy as other people who are running. But I mean, I love Kanye. So I relate to Kanye a lot, but doesn't mean I should be president.
He's got good music.
But that's amazing because it's funny. It's a meme. And it's like, I'll buy one of those. Heck yeah.
Yeah. I know college kids will buy it.
Yeah. Definitely send me the link.
Okay.
My stepson would wear one too. My stepson would definitely wear one. But no, you're right. Like, I am a hustler. That's another thing, is I hustle, but I have substance behind it. Like, early on, I tried to apply for things or like go for things I wasn't even qualified for. And I sort of learned that, like, okay, well, don't waste your time if like you literally are not qualified. Or like, I'm not a hustler of like scams or like schemes, but I am like, I do constantly think about ways to like engage myself. I mean, like at one point I had like 4 or 5 different jobs, like I'm always trying to figure out things. So that's another thing, is just like, I'm still lazy though. And I battle that, but I always like, I feel like I owe it to myself to just keep myself relevant, right? Like, just keep looking for opportunities to do something.
A lot of the times, one of the stuff that we work on in Relate in the Living and Learning community is like taking advantage of that opportunity. So like if the thought of the opportunity pops into your head and you're able to do it within a certain time frame, do it. Just do it.
Yeah, just do it.
Just do it. If you're walking by and you see someone's like struggling with something, or like they just dropped papers or something, like you just thought about it, go do it. It's not going to waste your time. Like,
send a text, send an email, like tell someone thank you, tell someone you appreciate.
Do you have a student example, and obviously you don't have to use their name, of when they were down in the dumps, and what allowed them to get back? What did they use? Did they use peer involvement? What's a way that they bounce back?
Oh man. I guess like my best example is I have a student that definitely does not have the easiest life circumstances and has other responsibilities, including a child. I guess I'll just leave it at that. And this student, he's just so passionate and so smart, but there is one particular professor that just is, they have a difficult relationship, and this student had like a few papers left and just like, I can't do it anymore. Angela, I can't, like, I just can't. And like, I knew it was like a matter of like, if this person drops out, if this person, he's going to want to drop out. And then and I was just like, I just said with him, I knew that I could be like tough love of like, after this, that's it. You're done. Like, this doesn't define you just because you don't particularly like this class or whatever. Like, you have to sit down and do it. Like, I'm sorry, but you have to.
There's some things that you don't want to do that you just have to do.
Yeah. And I remember papers or assignments where it was like pulling teeth, especially those like at the end of the year, like the last thing at the end of the year or whatever. Mm-hmm. Just like get it done and shut up. And then even like, I hate to say it, but this is also unfortunate sometimes, like this will come back and bite you in the ass with me, is like, I'm friends with him on Facebook. I was like, if I see you post one more stupid ass meme on Facebook and you're texting me about not writing your paper, like, no, get off Facebook. That's ridiculous. There was like so many things posting on Facebook, and I was like, nope. So I mean, the thing is like to compartmentalize. Like, okay, you feel like you want to give up, or you feel. I mean, I've had moments where it's just like nothing is going right, but you have to compartmentalize it. Okay, well, this thing's not going right, but what is, or like what could be worse? You know, and like thinking about that. And that's another thing is that I think like, I do think I've given good advice over the years, but like, sometimes you just have to like go away and like process information. And a lot of people nowadays, especially, like I've experienced that too. Like you're immediately on your phone, like texting your 3 best friends or whoever, like this is happening. Oh my God. And like that prevents you from being able to calm down. Like some people, maybe that helps you process. So I don't have any judgment on that, but like, I need to sit on it. Like I definitely have learned from other people in my life who just sit on something, right, instead of just reacting. And I've like calmed a lot down. But it's like, I do want to point out one thing. Like if you got it, you know it when you see it. That's another thing. Is like, what if you're a student in this class and you're like, I have no idea what they're talking about. And this is like if you don't, I don't know. That's my like big concern, right? Is because like, I call them kindred spirits, right? Like when you meet someone, you just get it. You're on the same wavelength. But then how do you reach people that maybe aren't? So if you're like in this class right now and you're watching this or whatever, and it's just not speaking to you, then you're going to have to figure out like why you're in college. Because I think the best of us, at least the way like the collective values are, is like, this is what it's about. This is why we're here, is because we are like, we geek out on self-awareness and self-exploration.
Yeah.
You know, and inquiry. That's my big word, is inquiry.
That's a good word.
Right?
Good word. And so I use addiction. I use addiction in a positive sense. I talk about it all the time. It's in all of my videos, saying that I'm addicted to psychology.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because you're obsessively thinking about something.
Yeah, because you want to probe, like you want to understand. Like when I learn about something, I want to know everything about it. That's why I went to Romania. It's like once I was interested in this thing, how am I not going to do everything in my power to understand? You know,
there's always going to be something that you're interested in.
Right.
And who knows? It may not be the status quo. Like it may not be a program like OT,
right,
or something like that,
right,
where OT takes a lot of the percentage of the incoming students. And so you say, oh well, I'm an English major or something like that, or a smaller major. And you say, well, I'm not the majority, but it doesn't really matter in a sense, because it's what you're individually interested in, finding your strengths. What was kind of well, you said you're able to hold a room with conviction. That's certainly one of your strengths, and not being able to feel embarrassed so that you can continue and go down rabbit holes like we are, that may be sometimes controversial. What do you think students could do to help find their strengths?
Well, I mean, definitely just in that sense of whether it be a field period or a class or an activity on campus, is again, like, I don't want this to sound like overly idealistic here, because you're going to run into like there's people I didn't get along with. There's jobs that I sucked at. Mm-hmm. You know, there's things that I did not do well at, but I mean, at least I tried and I managed to like extract myself with dignity from them. So like, we're not telling you like, oh, because that you're saying it, like, you're setting yourself up. It's unrealistic, right? If it's like, oh my God, look at John,
sunshine and rainbows. Yeah.
Yeah, or like, oh my God, Angela, like no, like I've been a pathetic failure at certain things I've tried, but at least I tried them. So for me, it's self-awareness. That's strength. Self-awareness is like, okay, I'm really not good at this. But then like, let me not beat up on myself and let me like pivot in a different direction.
And there's the union idea of, he talks about becoming a fool before the master. You must be a fool before you become a master.
Yeah.
And if you're not willing to become a fool, then you're not willing to learn.
Right. And I think that's a calculation everyone has to make. So those times when I was a fool and then I just left it as a fool, it's because there was something about that particular calling or vocation where I was like, you know what, I was a fool and I don't even want to, like, it's not a good fit to go any further. Whereas being a fool and then still wanting, you see a master and you like, you respect that and you want it for yourself, right? So that's what you have to read about yourself is like, because we're all going to have moments where we're going to fail, and maybe it's like not even our own fault, or maybe there's like a mixture of like, oh, well, that person was hard on me, or that person was a jerk, or that person wasn't a good manager, or didn't, like, that might even be true, but then you just use that and you're just like, okay, well, for whatever reason, that wasn't right for me. That wasn't allowing me to like leverage my skills.
Yeah, leverage your traits. Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, it's self-awareness. You really need to be able to figure out whether you're good at something or not, right? Like, and that takes time, right? We're all sort of, we could sort of be, what's the word? A little bit delusional on either end of thinking we're really good at something we're not, or thinking, or just being, what's the word? Like having low self-esteem when it's uncalled for.
Yeah.
But I think, a sign of maturity is really being able to be like, okay, no, deep down inside, like, no, this is something I'm good at, or like, nope, I'm not particularly good at this.
Just to try it.
Yeah.
There's a story. I have a story when I was little, my dad would drop me off at my grandmother's to make the dinner for the family and whatnot, and she did this several times, and I got annoyed at it, but looking back, I knew it was very meaningful. She would take spices, and so like say if it was for like a meat or whatever, and she would take like 7 or 8 spoons, and she would put the spices on the spoons. I remember the first time it was laid out, I was like, what are we doing here? Like, I'm not doing the cinnamon challenge, like,
Yeah.
But she would have me try the spices. At the time, I'm like, this is hot, like this is disgusting, and whatnot. But looking back at it, it was okay. Let's find what you do like, and then we can put it in the bowl and choose it. At least you're trying it,
right?
And you get to choose it.
Yeah.
So you get to choose to not have it by just simply making the decision to try.
Right.
And that's something that we touch on is decision making. And that analysis is that not only are you making a decision to have a yes or no for the decision, but you're also making a decision to not make the decision.
Right.
There's like a third option, or
right.
You can compromise, which is a fourth option. But
right. Yeah, I mean, what is it? I mean, I hate to say it, but, and again, this is why you don't have to be perfect at all this stuff all the time. You don't have to be self-aware all the time. You don't have to leverage your strengths all the time. But there's like a universal truth that deep down inside, and everyone has a compass. If you're doing it, if you're not. And growth only occurs, like you said, tension, right? Or like even just the other day reading something like, if it doesn't hurt, anyway, it was something about running, right? Like the best thing about running, as someone who took up running very late in life, is that something really sucks and you keep doing it and then it feels amazing. And there's nothing like that, right? Like that's that's the only way that you get better at doing that thing, right?
Yeah.
Right, that's the only way. Why on earth would people run? Like why on earth do people do things that are difficult?
Yeah.
They
It,
must know something that other people don't, right? That if you
it's
keep,
the euphoric chase.
yeah,
It's that chasing for the goal.
right.
I mean, there's more Jungian ideas where he talks about taking what you're basically doing is you're continually aiming for the goal. You're never going to reach the goal, but
Hmm.
the whole process is to continue towards the goal. So
Hmm.
even if you make the goal, I'll use like my hand.
Hmm.
Even let's say you're starting down here and the goal is over here, or you think the goal is over here, and so we take our 10 steps towards this goal, but in realization, when we get to this point, you see that the star or the goal in mind is a little off, and
Hmm.
so your trajectory changes, so your aim changes.
Yeah, and as someone now, like I just turned 40, right? And like, I'm definitely not where I thought I was going to be, but who knows what I even thought. Like I can't even remember what I thought when I was 20 or whatnot. But the point that I'm realizing is that like I'm not going to be dramatically different than what I am now, right? Like so 20 years from now, I'm not going to be doing some crazy radical thing.
Yeah.
Like the chance of that are very small. Like hopefully
Mm-hmm.
I'll still be a college professor, right? Hopefully I'll like my kids will be older. Hopefully I'll be married to the same person
Mm-hmm.
and just doing whatever it is I do. So there's not really this big thing to attain anymore. Like I've attained it. Like I'm a college professor. I'm very proud of that. But I still have dreams that are associated with like all the things that drove me when I was younger. And so, I've had a realization of recent years of like, okay, well, which of those things are realistic and which aren't? For a while, going back to Romania, traveling to Romania was not realistic. We
Mm-hmm.
didn't have money. My kids were small. Like, I certainly couldn't take them. I couldn't leave them. And then it got to the point where I could leave them. So I went and I took, the field periods and I took students to Romania. And now this spring, it was like, okay, well, what else could I do? Like, I was really thinking a lot about traveling. I was like, okay, well, let me apply to go back and teach. Like, that's one thing I can do. It's not ideal. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'll have to leave my family. Like, well, hopefully I'll take my kids with me. And it's not the answer. It's not Angela's going to get to go and live in Romania again. Like, that would probably be like my dream, right? Like, if you
Yeah.
had to be like in your dream situation, Angela, what would you be doing in 20 years? It'd be like, I'd be back living in Romania. Maybe I'd teach in Romania. My kids could live in Romania. I don't know. That's just like my fantasy, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's my like default thing. It's just like I'm happy there. But that's not realistic. Like my life is here. But I found ways to fit that in and it's like but it's dramatically revised. But see my point I think with your whole thing is I have still lived my life thinking that like I have this greater potential and like so okay so maybe I don't realize that whatever that means,
Mm-hmm.
right? But then does that mean I should have lived my life differently? Does that mean that when I was 20 I should have been like, oh okay, well you're just going to be when you're 40 or when you're 60 you're just going to be retired and just doing whatever? Like does that
Mm-hmm.
mean that I should have lived my life differently? No.
It's way better to have a redemptive mistake than to have a mistake that you never had.
Right, and
Right.
all mistakes are redemptive when you leave your life the right way. I don't regret any of my mistakes, well most of them.
Yeah,
You know what
right.
I mean? Like,
But you never, here's a really good thing, and all nursing students will be able to understand it is if you've ever volunteered at a nursing home and you've sat down
mhm,
with a person in a nursing home and you ask them what they regret, there's a far majority that will go on and on and on and talk to you about something that they've regretted. And it's like, man, if you really could limit the amount of regrets that you have in your life, just to take that experience and instead have a redemptive mistake
right.
where you've done it and made the mistake and then you can learn from it, you're
Hmm.
far better off than regretting something that you would have never known possible.
Right. That's an amazing, I mean, that's such an important and powerful reminder. And like, I think that students when you guys talk about this in this class, I think you should ask students to think of someone positive in their life, and so like someone who you think is generally a positive person and someone
Hmm.
who's like sort of negative,
Hmm.
and ask them the same question, see how they respond. Because for me, all of the people that I sort of are like cautionary role models for me, like I don't want to be like them. And
Hmm.
I really live my life like not trying not to be like certain people, mostly my parents, even though
You
my
know,
parents are great.
that's interesting because in the module that
Mhm.
you'll be in, we do the future authoring, which is by professor who you probably have heard of, Jordan Peterson.
Mhm.
Um, and so we use snippets of that. And so what they do is they create their ideal future.
Mhm.
So the best possibility if things were to go well for me for the next 4 years, and then they create the future that they'd like to avoid.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
they create the worst possible future, which maybe even consists of death. Um, you
Right.
know, but they write it out in description, and so it takes them about an hour to do over a 2-day process. And,
Mhm.
and what they're doing is to basically, and we've talked about this consistently, was about the trajectory, about the aim. So if we can put this ideal forward in us and allow it to pull us forward, this judge, this
Mhm.
ideal, then we can also have a future that we'd like to avoid that would push us away.
Right, because and just think of the people if you ask them. Like that's so sad if you ask, like what if you asked me today, like what how do you feel? Oh, well, I didn't end up getting to do this, and oh, well, I ended up here and I have to, like that's just so sad, you know?
It
It's
is.
so
It
sad to
is. It
have.
really is.
And I know the people that are going to have them and I know the people that aren't. Like I have these people in my life. I have examples of both. And it's funny that that exercise will be really important because I hate to say it, but like positive role models are absolutely like the most empowering thing that I've had in my life, but negative role models are important too. You shouldn't knock them, right? And unfortunately, a lot of that can sometimes involve judgment and like like I definitely judged adults in my life for a long time, and that's like I tell my students like you're going to judge the hell out of like I tell people in my classes like I'm sure you're judging the hell out of me right now, but like just
Yeah.
don't like you can do that. Use that to motivate you, but as you get older, you also become more humble, where
Mhm.
the people that you once judged, you just understand why they are the way they are, right?
Real quick, you have a bobblehead in the back?
Oh, it's my husband's.
Because I,
That one's from a Braves game. Do you know about me and the Mets?
no.
Oh, well, we're Mets fans.
Okay.
So so that's this is the thing my husband got to keep. It's like
Uh-huh.
all of his junk, but I organized it. So that's a bobblehead from when we went to a Braves game.
Uh-huh.
But we're Mets fans. So here, we got married at the Mets last year at home opener. There's like a
No kidding.
yeah, so that was like our wedding outfit, the Queen's shirt. And then we had just married jerseys.
That's
And
cool.
we're members of the Seven Line Army, but let's see, what do we have that's Mets in my house? Mets. My placemats are Mets. Everything's Mets. There's a Mets flag out front. Everything is Mets. Yeah, we love the Mets. I love baseball.
That's
But
cool.
yeah, so my husband and I, we got married at opening day last year. So
That's
that was
cool.
fun. Yeah, just like in the parking lot.
That's cool.
So yeah, so it's sad without baseball, but that's okay. We'll be
Yeah.
fine.
Right. I was gonna show you my bobblehead that I got from John Accardi,
Oh my God,
of Professor Burke.
that's so cool.
Yeah, right.
Where did he get it? Like it's just something old he has?
This is he has like a huge stash in his
Uh-huh.
office in student affairs. And so when I got asked to work in student affairs for the marketing, he offered it up if I
Uh-huh.
wanted another bobblehead. He has this game that he plays with the athletic director, what's his name? Jeff?
Bray, yeah.
Yeah, Jeff Bray. They try and hide bobbleheads in each other's offices.
Oh,
And
that's
so
fun.
one day he had me, John Accardi had me go into Jeff's office and hide a bobblehead in his drawer. So it was
That's
kind of
so
cool.
cool.
Yeah.
You should have bobbleheads made of Koberstein.
Yeah, yeah, right.
That would be
I think
really
it'd be
cool.
cool.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
It'd probably have to have a husky symbol, but we can just
Right,
make it.
yeah.
We can just make it say it's a wolf. I mean,
Right, yeah. Yeah, it could serve two purposes, dual
Yeah.
purposes.
All right. Well, thanks for
Okay.
chatting.
Yeah, thanks, John. Let
Yep.
me know how everything ends up.
I will. I'll keep
Yeah,
you updated.
sure. Okay,
Great.
bye.
Bye. Take care.